Hello, everybody. It's been a while, hasn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for yet another exciting episode of Fantasy Tavern. This is a very long overdue episode, so Phobos is lurking around here somewhere as well as usual. We are ready to get this episode off to hopefully a great start. The theme of this episode, in case you're wondering why I'm serving that mask trade today, is the drag episode. The drag is dragon. Drag the house down, boots, kinky boots. And so I decided to, just be in my mask feels today. I didn't want to overdo it. So I've gone with the standard kind of hipstery patterned button down. Some tasteful jewelry with a bit more of a bushy eyebrow. Tried to kind of hide my hair. I kind of pulled it back into a bit of a bun here. I was thinking of going for the fuckboy man bun, but I decided against it. And now all I need is a drag king name. So I have a few suggestions. I couldn't really decide on one. So I thought I'd list a few off and see if you guys want to vote on which one you think is the best. Oliver Body. I kind of like that one. Jackson 5. Max Speeds, kind of like, the multiple speeds on your personal sexual marital aids. Wesley Swipes made me laugh out loud. That's a great one. What other ones did they have? Hi. Hey, Phobos. You have some suggestions? I like stand up and sit down, but pronounced in the Jamaican way. So Jamaican saying stand up and sit on. So that would be I think that would be fucking hilarious. That would be great if you had a duo that you could pair up together. Yeah, so those are some of the ones that I liked. If you have any other suggestions, please let me know. Let me just go grab some of the alcoholic beverages that I decided to get for this episode. I'm gonna hold down the fort for a sec while I do that, Phobos. Why are you so handsome today? Why are you the best cat? So here, nice job, buddy. I was trying to find the gayest drinks at LCBO, the most queer-ass drinks. They didn't seem to have a huge selection this year of specifically rainbow or pride or LGBTQ-themed beverages. Some of you may remember the controversy among the right-wingers and the conservatives when Bud Light released their gay beer cans and also had a trans person as one of their spokespeople in their ads recently. All the bigots got in their feels about that one. So Bud Light doesn't have any gay beer this year, which kind of upset me. This year, the only thing I really found that was branded was this Keep Calm wine. It says on here, Keep Calm and Love. It is a blush Pinot Grigio, so not totally a rosé. It's very, very subtle. Rosé all day, hey. So for the basic bitches, and if you're trying to find a gift or something appropriate for, your gay-ass parties, cookouts, showers, weddings, funerals, good all-purpose wine there. I found this. I don't normally drink these, but there's a now famous viral quote from the actor who plays Rhaenyra on the House of the Dragon series, the Game of Thrones prequel. And they're actually non-binary, which is really cool. That Negroni Spagliato with Prosecco quote. So apparently the Negroni is now a gay drink. It's a very classic drink. It's made with Campari, which I kind of despise. But, gay shit is gay shit. So, and then the last one I got, because I feel kind of the quintessential LGBTQ drink, especially for the gay gentleman, would be a vodka cooler, also called Alka-Pops, on the light side of calories and with maybe a slight fruit flavor. Those seem to be very popular. So this one, of course, I had to pick the one that was called Boysenberry. Get it? You see what I did there? Yep. I'm going to try this one first because it was extremely hot and humid today. Probably like get this cracked out and like, why did I say cracked out? I'm going to be cracked out. Grab the crack pipe. I want to say cranked out, but that sounds kind of gross too. Crank it out. With my huge man penis, I'm going to crank it out in about 2 hours with my biggest dick energy that I got. Look, I'm really proud of this, honestly. It's really not much, but I even put like a butt chin in there. I added some like contour to give like kind of a 5 o'clock shadow. I even tried to draw an Adam's apple on it. Like, come on, give a bitch some credit. All right? I am feeling a strange sense of gender euphoria right now that I haven't felt in a long time. I haven't done this in quite some time, so I'm having a lot of fun right now. I have been working a lot on my music stuff, and as I've been teasing for quite some time to start the process of doing this small table jam. It's very exciting. That's actually finally happening. It's coming together very nicely. I'm learning so much about, like how the different instruments work, how to care for them, how to assemble a drum kit. My lessons have been going really well. I'm just kind of learning some more basics to build on what I was already taught. And yeah, just kind of going to keep continuing with that. Do posts for Small Table Jam. Developments are developmenting. After a very arrested development for a couple months there. I'm going to also show you the snacks that I actually like made a snack kind of today. Gay snacks. Oh yeah, and I was going to tell you House of the Dragon. Emma Darcy is their name. I apologize. Sorry. I'm already fucking up, guys, and this is why this is important to do, because I still fuck up with people's pronouns and doing the right thing and not being offensive, right? So I'm still learning too and trying to change that programming, right? Like, I identify as she and they, so I should fucking know better. But, sometimes I forget, right? And, I corrected myself. So I believe Emma Darcy uses they, them pronouns. Really cool to see the non-binary representation in a prominent way, which is really cool. So that was the person I was mentioning before who did the whole, like, Negroni, Sabagliato with Prosecco quote. When I Googled gay snacks, there were some great ideas. Someone came up with sour rainbow candy strips, which are great. If you guys remember Epic Mealtime, I believe he referred to these as gay bacon strips. We have those on the plate here. And then the ones I made today, a really funny suggestion for gay snacks was lady fingers. So I picked up actually at the dollar. These are both from the dollar store. These are really nice lady fingers. Like they were still nice and soft in the package. They smelled incredible. And then I just bought like a dark chocolate bar from the dollar store, mixed it in a bowl with some almond coconut milk and a little bit of cocoa powder to kind of thicken it up because I added too much almond coconut milk and it wasn't turning into like a dip. So that saved it. So that's a little hack for you if you have like a chocolate sauce that you put too much liquid in. You can thicken it up with some cocoa powder. Should solve that issue. Put these in the fridge for a little bit just to set the chocolate a bit. So let's take a bite of these. I'm really excited for this. I tasted the chocolate and it was really good. Very nice. I just didn't want to put bare-ass ladyfingers on the plate, so I figured I'd dip them in something. If your ladyfingers are brown, you may have put them in the wrong hole. Or maybe it was the right hole. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. So that was a good decision. We also have our sour gay bacon strip chaser. It's a perfect combination. It's like it was meant to be. This is really all I had the energy for. I'm actually pretty proud of this as well. Whoever's journey, the LGBTQ community does have a higher incidence of mental health issues, suicide, trauma. And I was actually in the course of researching alcohols for this episode. LGBTQ community tends to have quite a high incidence of alcoholism, binge drinking. A lot of that, again, due to the aforementioned mental health issues. So I think that it's really important to, before we get into this episode, acknowledge that drag has been an outlet for the queer community to release that negative energy and channel those traumatic experiences into artistic creativity and gender and sexual expression. So that's a really big statement. Look at this little paw sticking out in the frame. Oh, you're such a baby. Yeah, you are like a little baby. Such a proud cat daddy. Anyway, and yes, I am daddy today, so get into it, bitch. Unfortunately, nowadays, drag is under threat once again, and so I thought that, more so than ever, this episode was really important to do and to put out. I may not get everything in one episode. Please, the queers, I really hope you don't come for me right now if I omit some information. There's a lot of history and lore and pop culture influence of drag, and I'm going to try and touch on every single mini little part of it briefly. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos where they kind of talk about the iceberg of a certain topic or genre or something like that. And it's like kind of like a half an hour of just little bullet points of examples of a topic, which has really kind of inspired me to kind of be more succinct, I guess, in terms of the information I'm going to give. I will put this disclaimer on the episode caption, the description, but there may be some use of some inappropriate terms, and there's going to be certain terms that were previously used to refer to certain people who did drag or dressed in a way and presented themselves in a way that did not match their initial biological sex, that then got that gender assigned to it based on, being male or female and within the binary. So when I use those terms, I'm going to try and like reiterate that they're used for exploitation purposes, and that that's not really a term people should use or that isn't used anymore, but that it is sometimes those are the terms that were previously used to describe drag and people who performed it. Let's just get right into it. We'll take a little sip of my drink here. Oops. Okay, so let's take a sip of that boysenberry. Bottoms up, everybody. So let's get started with the history, the brief, truncated history of drag. The concept of drag in general is when somebody dresses in a gender non-conforming way. So historically, hello, stop being so cute already. Anyway, so historically, if you were male, if you were born as a biological male, then you would be socialized and grow up presenting your gender as a man. And if you were assigned female at birth, biologically female, then you would be, and just letting you know, there are more than just male and female as biological, as we've come to find out. There are a few other different sort of potential options for biologically combining chromosomes and having kind of like different variations off of the male-female binary. So we have like intersex and things like that. But a lot of the time when someone is found to be intersex, they will just pick a gender based on what's easier. And that person will be raised with that gender, even though biologically they may have both male and female anatomy. And this may not come out till much later in their life. And so it may cause, kind of like a rift in their identity. So drag is basically the expression of gender that is kind of playing with it, not really taking it seriously, and being more fluid with it. So a person who is male and was initially raised and socialized and lives as a man, and they do in normal life outside of their drag performance persona. And historically, drag has been used for other reasons, not just performance, but we kind of come to know it today as an entertainment type expression. But drag was also considered in terms of disguises, and for trans people, gender fluid people throughout history, wanting to express themselves with a different gender all the time and live as a gender that they were not raised with. And there's also a lot of different androgynous drag. There's, female impersonation drag, male impersonation drag. So there's actually like drag that it's sort of like a caricature or a satire of gender. And then there's also drag that seeks to be the most authentic, sort of stereotypical expression of what a man or a woman is, to the point where if they normally were a man and dressed as a woman, you couldn't tell that they were a man. So, and vice versa. And historically, that's been for many different reasons. I'll also go into two-spirit, third genders. That's sort of the idea of drag. It's expressing yourself in any gender that you want to, outside of what society deems is what you should be. And drag queen is somebody who lives as a man in their regular sort of day-to-day life, but they also have another persona where they dress and act as a woman. And so that's the same thing for drag kings. So it's somebody who lives their life as a woman, and then their other persona would be as a man. So that's what I'm kind of serving today, is the drag king side of it. I felt like since a lot of the time I already present as a woman, only sometimes do I typically go for a mask or androgynous look. I usually would go more for androgynous than like actually presenting fully as a man. Today, I kind of decided to take it a little bit further in the spirit of the episode. When I was younger, I used to do male drag a lot more. I've dressed up as Prince. I've dressed up as George Michael. I really do have always liked to kind of play with gender and that sort of expression my whole life. But I also like being hyper femme sometimes too, and putting on the long nails, the long eyelashes, having the long hair, the cleavage. I'll go into a little bit about gender affirmations and gender euphoria a little bit as well. I think nowadays it's really cool to see that people can just have that freedom of expression and have it be so artistic and have so many people be entertained and have it be more accepted. Because I think that there's a lot of people who, for religious reasons or what have you, think it's a sin, or they think it's against family values. We've got all these issues about, like the drag time story hours being affected. People, the laws come, I'm thinking of the States right now, but like other countries as well, have very strict laws against the LGBT community, including drag. And we'll touch on that kind of historically as well, all of those laws and stuff. But the world's a pretty fucked up place right now. And we just need more gayness. We need more queer representation, because I think that people are trying to take it away. And, like when you think you're all past that, there's now people coming in trying to threaten everything that the LGBTQIA plus community has worked for all of these years. So the terminology for drag, as I mentioned before, it's gender expressed usually through wearing very stylized, over the top concept of gender. No one's really sure where the term drag came from. There's a couple different ideas where it came from. So in theater, this is where the term drag seems to have originated from. So back in Shakespeare's time, starting around that time, so for theater slang, because back when stage performances were only performed by men, yet women's roles were still written into the script, men would dress as women to perform those roles. Later on, of course, women were allowed onto the stage, but there was a very long time period where it was not allowed. Going back even to Greek and Roman times, there was instances of cross-dressing elements of performance. Cross-dressing is not really a term that you're supposed to use anymore, but back at the time, this is kind of what it was referred to, as well as a drag, cross-dressing. Plautus wrote a very famous play, Menechmi. It's a Roman play. The idea that the opportunity to dress in drag causes extreme joy. The character of Menechmi puts their wife's dress on and wants their peer to tell them that they're beautiful. There's a lot of both recorded plays where cross-dressing takes place, drag performance takes place, as well as many artistic sculptures, pottery, depicting theatrical performance involving drag. So going back to England in Shakespearean plays in the 15 and 1600s, parts that were supposed to be performed by women were banned from public performance. And Shakespeare has a lot of plays that involve drag. Twelfth Night and As You Like It are a couple good examples. But that's like plays that specifically reference drag of a person consciously dressing as the opposite gender. But this was a practice that was in every Shakespeare play that had roles of women that were actually consistently supposed to be women in the whole play, played by men, because women legally were not allowed to. And so the term drag, as we know it in English, there's two theories as to where it came from. Because they were wearing very long skirts at the time, women's fashion and the costumes that they would wear would drag on the floor of the stage. That's where the term drag initially came from. So it was very much initially associated with men in drag, playing women. It's now kind of an umbrella term for anybody kind of fucking with gender as a physical expression, but back then it was like really acknowledged as men in drag. We do also have a lot of historical examples of women dressing as men in order to command respect, convince men that they were men as well, in order to move through society a little bit easier and get employment. It took so long for women to be not treated like second-class citizens. A lot of women decided that the only real way that they can get by is to pretend to be men. This was more of a survival thing, more than it was an entertainment, an expression that they wanted to do. This was because they had to, because of how society was at the time. During the reign of Charles II, mainly because Charles II had a lot of hoes, and a lot of those hoes were actresses, performers, and they helped to change the rules to allow women back on stage again. Men routinely playing female roles started to disappear. We also have in other cultures, Japanese theater has a lot of similar history. If you've ever seen the movie Shakespeare in Love, it talks a lot about that. And drag as a theater trope still does exist a lot in British pantomime, where there's usually like a principal role that's always a man playing a woman. A lot of Monty Python sketches, and I'm actually thinking right now, Kids in the Hall is another good example, would often use drag in their sketches. In kabuki theater, again, it's extremely stylized. There's a lot of like heavy face makeup, elaborate costumes, masks are often involved as well. Also, historically, females, women in society, I keep saying females, I fucking hate that word. I don't know why I keep saying it, because it's in the fucking, can we just like kill the, oh man. Straight men saying females, like, don't even fucking get me started. So in the earliest kabuki, women were allowed to perform and also did drag as well as men. It was an art form that was performed by both men and women. This also parlayed a lot into, similarly to Charles II's mistresses and girlfriends and whatnot, they also kind of moonlighted as escorts and prostitutes to offer sexual services after performances. Because that started happening, there was the replacement of women with men in kabuki performances. Back in 1651, okay, it's like around the time that England was changing its rules to allow women, the restrictions for only males performing on stage, and the male performers, as I said, would play both men and women. It did end up getting lifted, but there are still some traditional kabuki troupes that will uphold this tradition of only men performing. As we can see, theater and, theater and the gays, like, it's kind of a peanut butter and jelly situation. I'm not surprised that theater has a lot to do with where drag comes from. Like, a lot of, as I said, the drag that we are know and love today is all theatrical performance. And what better way to kind of express what you want to with all sorts of costumes and props and makeup that can really transform you into who you need to be and want to be than the theater. And, like actors honing their craft, but there are some criticisms of this as well as in modern drag performance. Some people feel like the performance of men performing as women, it turned the way women act is sort of like generalized and turns it into like a stereotype and a trope. Exaggeration of what women are based on a male lens. So that is definitely a big issue that has been brought up in drag. And that's where we're kind of seeing a lot more androgynous drag coming into popularity, where it's not like an overt depiction of like what a woman should look like. There's a lot more room to play, I think, now with drag in that respect. It's not like you have to be this unclockable version of the other gender. Like, you can kind of be both. And I think that's really good too, that's kind of come into favor. So those are the two possible etymologies of the term drag. There's also masquerade balls, where those are typically characterized by having a mask as well, sort of like a handheld mask on a stick that obscures your face. So it would be very easy for somebody who did want to dress in drag to achieve that at a masquerade ball, and no one may be the wiser, since there's a sort of a sense of anonymity there of not being able to fully see what your original gender was. Grand rag was a term used for a masquerade ball, so it may be a shortened version of that as well. We're not entirely sure. I think the prevailing idea is that it comes from the dresses dragging on the floor. That's what most people say. That's where the term drag comes from. We see mask coming up, not mask, M-A-S-C, but this could also be, like both makeup and a physical mask is going to transform you from one gender to the other. And there's also, in pretty much all theatrical performances, there's been a lot of, it kind of transitioned from theater to burlesque to going underground because of societal pressure, and then kind of coming back out in the 60s and then evolving to what it is in the present day. It was not as common for women to dress as men for theatrical roles. Back in the day, women dressing as men, it would be kind of under pressure for some sort of dramatic predicament they were in, or for some real world reason, as I mentioned before. Men dressing as women pretty much always used as a comedic device, to the point where it was lowbrow and like poking fun and mocking what a woman is. Now that has, of course, changed a little bit. And that's where we're kind of seeing the distinction between a drag queen and a female impersonator. There's a couple examples of traditions of cross-dressing. Peter Pan has a very long historical example of a woman playing a man's part. One of the very rare instances. Traditionally, especially in like a lot of British theater, Peter Pan will be played by a woman. Typically, I guess, women being chosen to play men, they usually tended to cast with an age that's on the younger side. Again, stereotypically, they're looking for like smaller, shorter women that could convincingly play young boys. That's something a lot of men couldn't really achieve. And even in like a lot of voiceover acting, a lot of voices are voiced by women. Because when a boy is younger, the register of their voice is still quite high. And so it's easier as a voice actor to have a woman's more, I guess, typically, not all women have the same tone of voice. Like some women have a deeper voice and some women don't. Like a higher pitched voice is more convincing for a young boy and easier for a woman to do. That's not really a full example of drag, but it is an example, I guess, of off of the initial point I made of like some roles that exist for women to perform as men. Opera also has this convention. Commedia dell'arte, also in Italian, Spanish theater. 16th and 17th century, this was very popular to have cross-dressing. Again, there were a lot of laws targeting what they would refer to as cross-dressing or transvestitism, but drag was very popular in this form. There was also a lot of, in France especially, roles were often cross-cast in French. There was like a trendy period where this was happening both in ballet, opera, dramas, comedies. So they actually kind of paved a little bit of the way for cross-casting, cross-gender casting. The musical Hairspray typically will have the role of Tracy's mother, Edna Turnblad, played by a man in drag. Famously, Harvey Fierstein and John Travolta and Nina West, a famous drag queen, have performed this role on Broadway and in the movie versions. Oh yeah, Hook. Hook was an example I was going to mention. Glenn Close. I only found this out a few years ago. One of the pirates on the ship, goes by the name of Gutless, was Glenn Close in drag. RuPaul was in a lot of different movies that I will mention. I'm going to have a whole separate part about RuPaul, because RuPaul in recent years has become a very divisive drag queen. We're going to go into the whole RuPaul's Drag Race phenomenon and RuPaul's career in a moment. But RuPaul was in quite a few movies in drag. The Brady Bunch movie, Very Brady sequel, The Tu Wong Fu. Tootsie is another really good example. Dustin Hoffman. Tootsie is about somebody who's dressing in drag for employment purposes. And there's also Victor Victoria. Victor Victoria is a really great movie. It's very, very cool. It's Julie Andrews, who is a woman, lives as a woman, but for entertainment purposes, decides to come up with an idea for a drag performer who became a woman who pretended to be a man in real life, who then, as the pretend man, pretended to be a woman in drag for stage performances. So there's like 3 separate layers of gender, like a little Russian nesting doll, going on there. Hey, buddy. Yeah, I know. It's a super great movie and musical. And I feel like it speaks so much to some of the discrimination and lack of understanding about acceptance of the queer community and drag performance. It's just a really intelligent concept. If you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you watch it. Mrs. Doubtfire, Robin Williams, obviously the GOAT. This is where a man loses custody of his children, and in the midst of a messy divorce, and in order to see his children, he impersonates a woman and gets a job as their nanny. If you haven't seen it, you're fucking crazy. You still know what I'm talking about. The Birdcage is another great example. I believe Robin Williams was in that as well with Nathan Lane, the popular English version. It was initially a performance called La Cage aux Folles. It's sort of more translated as the Cage of Fools. It's also translated as Birds of a Feather. The general plot of that movie is a middle-aged gay couple who run a nightclub where they perform in drag, as well as other performers there. One of them has a son. The son is straight and gets engaged, and her parents are extremely conservative and want to meet his family. So, of course, hilarity ensues when the two gay dads have to pretend to butch it up and hide their careers and their sexual orientation and their relationship. So that's another great one if you haven't seen it to check out. Going through a little bit more of history, there was a time in Hollywood cinema, sort of between the end of the theater performance of vaudeville, burlesque, and unfortunately minstrel shows. These all used cross-dressing drag performance. There was a very famous person called William Dorsey Swan. This was one of the first American performers to refer to themselves as the Queen of Drag. They were organizing and hosting drag balls mainly in the DC area. That was a major turning point in not only drag as coining the term Queen of Drag, drag queen, but also not just having social events for the LGBTQ community, but also for African American drag. There was a time that before the Hays Code censored a lot of expression in Hollywood for discriminatory reasons to, I guess, clean up and be more wholesome for the family values of America. Before that, there used to be a lot of drag and queer representation in film, but this kind of, for quite a while, fell out of favor, and you didn't really see that representation often. This came back into popularity in the 60s. There was a resurgence of drag and female impersonation in the form of pageants. So it was similar to, a beauty pageant, but it was all men, usually gay men, who were striving to be the most convincing woman impersonator. So it was not drag as a over-the-top stylized art form that was abstract and caricature style. This was actually trying to be the most unclockable, flawless, real woman. The term for that in the modern drag community is fishy. So if you look fishy, that means that you look like a quote-unquote real woman. So there's a really good movie called The Queen that came out in the 60s, which chronicles one such very famous pageant run by iconic drag queen Flawless Sabrina. Also shows of a lot of other drag queens. They did, of course, as I said, they didn't call themselves drag queens at the time. They called themselves female impersonators. It's kind of just a documentary about them coming to New York, all meeting up together to prepare for this pageant, all of the old school drag makeup and wardrobe tips and tricks that people back in the 60s used to use. Kind of just shows every single category, everybody coming out to do the swimsuit and the gown and all of that stuff. And then, they crown a winner based on I suppose, the most beautiful and convincing woman. There's a very famous scene within that movie where there's another very iconic drag queen, Crystal LaBeija, who is a non-white drag queen. So Crystal famously storms off the stage when she doesn't place in the pageant the way she thinks that she should. There's quite a lengthy scene in which Crystal goes off claiming that racism and favoritism has basically excluded her and other drag queens of color from ever getting a title. This kind of speaks to the credit for modern drag becoming popular being put on the Black community to really help it come up. And a lot of people associate drag with white gay men now, but it's very much a community and an art form that was honed within Black and Latin culture among a community that was very marginalized. And so the societal expectations of beauty all around the world was whiteness and thinness. LaBeija was in this it was called the Miss All-America Camp Beauty Pageant. She is calling out a bunch of different drag queens. There's a very famous quote where somebody says, "Oh, we can see your true colors now, Crystal. You're a sore loser. You're just jealous. You're just trying to start drama." To which Crystal LaBeija responds, "I have a right to show my color, darling." Oh, and her makeup was terrible, which I think is just, look at her makeup. It's terrible. It's actually just like the funniest fucking shit to watch. I think I've watched that clip like at least 50 times. It's just so perfect. Where is Sabrina? I'll sue the bitch. Ha ha ha. Oh my god, so good, so good. When drag culture continued from pageants into what's called ballroom culture, where it was sort of a similar idea, but they started adding a lot more categories within the pageant idea that made it more of a performance and gave people more options for their drag. It became less of a stand there and look pretty thing and more of not only did you need to be a convincing person of the opposite gender, but they actually had competitions to see who could be the most convincing straight man. They had voguing competitions. They had like the best model walk. And so the balls sort of became less influenced by beauty pageants and more influenced by the emergence of fashion models and fashion runway culture and things that people would be seeing at like fashion shows from designer houses and runways when models would walk on a runway. So these houses that started becoming created within the drag community were a direct call out to, like, you know, the house of Gucci, the house of Versace, all of these, like House of Chanel, but they would name it after themselves. So Crystal LaBeija was one of the first drag queens to create the House of LaBeija. And the house wasn't just sort of like the dance crew, if you will, of drag queens coming in to do their thing, but it also became, Crystal LaBeija was one of the first people to actually have a house for people where she would provide a home and food and opportunities for a lot of these performers who unfortunately were quite young and because of their family situation were getting kicked out of their house, hey buddy, being abused and living on the street and getting themselves into not super great situations involving theft, prostitution, drug use, and things like that. And then especially when it became the 80s and 90s in the wave of the AIDS epidemic, these houses were also helped provide a lot of medical care and a place where people could deal with their treatment and their terminal illness without any stigma, and with us people that would help support them and help them have at least sort of a hospice situation, if anything, for the time that they were dealing with that. The first ball was kind of presented by Crystal and Lottie LaBeija back in the early 70s. And then as we fast forward through to the 80s, we're seeing more elements of, as I said, the combination of the physical drag with more elements of dance, which came into voguing, walk-offs, and things of that nature. They would still get trophies at the end of the performance. They would give out trophies for different categories, so some different people would have a chance to place. It was still extremely competitive. There was still a lot of drama that would happen within these, but ultimately it was all in fun, and it was sort of a way to have your peers validate what you were doing and feel validated yourself. Moving forward into the 80s and 90s, I'll name off a few more movies that I forgot that have to do with drag. But we've got Paris is Burning, of course. One of the most iconic American documentaries about drag. And a movie that I've seen several times. I was first introduced to it when I was in university. I went to theater school and took a lot of courses on performance of various kinds. One of my favorite classes that I ended up taking was gender and performance. In addition to learning about a lot of historical drag within theater and sort of the motivation and the long line of performers that have both people who live as one gender and perform as another, or people in the trans community, how gender is always a performance, regardless of whether that's something that you live as or something that you just perform as on a stage. It's all performance in some way or another. There's, of course, that famous quote by RuPaul, "We're all born naked and the rest is drag." I don't know if that was him who actually invented that, but he popularized it. Sort of implying that when you're born, for a few seconds, you don't have to conform to any gender. And then society decides what it is based on what's in your pants. Then you don't really have much of a say about it until later in your life when you start to decide that that's not exactly the way you want to live all the time. So, and I actually got a chance to meet a very famous Canadian trans actor and educator, Nina Arsenault. So if you haven't heard of her, I suggest that you look them up. We went through the script of a couple of theater works that they were involved in which they're extremely candid in their work about their upbringing as being very poor, funding a lot of their transitional feminization surgery as well as performance through sex work. The Silicone Diaries is one of the most famous plays. I don't know, I consider it a very great honor to have actually met her in real life, and she had so much. Yeah, I highly suggest you check out Nina Arsenault and her work. It will probably make a lot of people uncomfortable. It's extremely in-depth about the reality of being trans and working in the arts and working in the sex industry. One of my favorite stories within her plays was the time that she met Tommy Lee. So I won't talk about that anymore. You can go Google it for yourself. But yeah, going back to Paris is Burning, which is another movie that I found out in the course of taking this class. I had never seen it before. It is absolutely one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. Excuse me, one of the greatest documentaries out there to kind of introduce people who may not really know about how the drag scene and how the ballroom scene really operated. It really gave a really cool, in-depth, behind-the-scenes look at what goes on. They go through what all the houses are. They go through all the different categories that you might see at a ball. Everything from like high fashion model to glamour to your round the way Banji girl to military executive realness, academic, collegiate attire. Like they had a category for like almost every possible role in society that you could think of. And so they really went into the whole idea that like people through this drag performance got to live out their fantasies of being a supermodel, of being a CEO, of being, a rich housewife, of whatever sort of fantasy you had, you could go into a category in these drag balls and live that out and express that. They also went into some detail about a few of the more famous, popular performers within these ballroom scenes in New York. Some of them, like I said, were gay men who would only do this drag sort of for these ballroom performances. Some people were actually transgender and using the balls to kind of facilitate their transition. Then we also had people who didn't really do the drag part of it so much, but they would engage in other parts of the ballroom scene, like the dance aspect, the voguing part of it, which is, if you look into Willy Ninja, the House of Ninja, they were very influential with bringing Vogue to the masses. Madonna did not invent Vogue. She took it from the gay culture. She popularized it from an art form that was already in existence within gay clubs and ballrooms, and basically just brought it to the masses. And a lot of people don't realize that she's talking about gay culture within that song, but that's basically the whole song is referencing all of the stuff that community brought to the table in terms of Vogue as a dance form. Willy Ninja went on to become very famous, bringing Vogue to the world, and then, Madonna jumped on it, and the rest is history. We have a couple different reality competition shows with voguing and drag that has further brought it into prominence. Voguing is also where we get some of the more iconic dance and physical performance moves that you see with a lot of drag queens nowadays. So like splits, shablams, death drops, things like incorporating some elements of ballet and interpretive dance. There's a lot of like isolated hand motions. They show that in the movie, like the fake taking the makeup, putting it on your face, checking yourself out, and then showing the mirror to your opponent to show them how busted and ugly they look and how good you look. So it's like voguing is basically like throwing shade at an opponent in physical form. I find it very similar to like capoeira a little bit, but like more cunty. So that's honestly, it's a really cool thing to watch. There's been a lot of shade thrown towards a lot of people who they're claimed to be doing like faux voguing, pretending to do it and like taking a few movements and motions out of it, but not actually expressing the true form of Vogue. Paris is Burning. Check it out. It's a great movie. So many terms from that movie are still used within the community today. Shade and reading. There's a whole thing. Dorian Corey from that movie, who's also a very famous, iconic drag queen, talks a lot about the terms that you'll hear within the scene. So reading would be like when you're just full out insulting somebody, roasting them, calling them out for anything and everything you can think of. Whereas shade is like more passive aggressive, saying a sort of tongue-in-cheek thing to somebody, where the way she describes it is like you do it in a way where it's like, well, I don't have to tell you that you don't look good because you already know. You see it a lot in like old movies within like women being catty towards each other and sort of saying like a very sly sort of insult. That's where it's sort of, you can't really call them out, but you just got insulted. Reading's more direct and to your face, where shade is like, I'm going to say something really bitchy and you can't really call me out, but you know that I just insulted you. Paris is Burning was kind of like the milestone in the very, like, is a clear delineation of when Paris is Burning kind of came out, and then what happened, everything that happened after. All just sort of fell into place. Drag queens started becoming more popular and brought into the forefront of entertainment, being put in more movies again, featured in music videos, featured in ad campaigns, were actually allowed to walk on some runways. there's been such an explosion of it in popularity, and that sort of will culminate in our discussion about RuPaul's Drag Race. So we talked a lot about drag queens, but we're going to talk a little bit about drag kings. So a drag king, as we've seen, so a drag queen is someone who generally will live as a man in their normal life, but perform as a woman. Sometimes that person will be transgender or gender nonconforming, non-binary, something to that effect. And drag king is now been associated with a female performance. Fuck, I keep saying female. I'm so sorry. Woman performance artist. I guess female is sort of still accurate if you're referring to a woman who's still biologically female, but that may not be the case. We've seen in sort of the example of RuPaul's Drag Race, there have been a couple instances of cis women and trans men now competing, and actually one straight man competing in the show. So, and there's a famous drag queen, Gottmik, who appeared on RuPaul's Drag Race a couple times in the last few years. And so there's also kind of a distinction between drag queens who kind of have their own aesthetic and persona, and impersonation in terms of drag queens impersonating famous celebrities. So some very typical ones will be, Madonna, Judy Garland, Liza Minnelli, gay icons, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson. Those are some popular drag king personas. They're going to be performing in a very exaggerated macho sort of way. A lot of drag queens will wear padding to kind of enhance their hips, wear corsets, and put on breastplates to more mimic the stereotypical womanly shape. Drag kings will often put on a breastplate that is like a molded pecs and abs and arm muscles that they'll incorporate into their costume, and as well as kind of what I'm doing here with the facial hair. They'll either put on a beard or mustache or draw it on, as well as having the bushier eyebrows, all that stuff. They'll start acting in sort of a more like manly demeanor, yeah, sup girl, hey girl. Do you think that Dick Tracy is a good drag king? Because I do. That might be the one right there. Although I think it's a little hard to say. It's kind of sounding like Sean Connery a little bit. Maybe we'll table that one. Not me fucking sitting like a fucking bi. Let's actually sit properly on the couch, guys. As I mentioned before, there's drag for women was less about the entertainment aspect of it and more about social mobility a lot of the time. But now it's very much a performance thing. There's actually almost just as long or longer of a history of women performing in men's attire throughout history. The term breeches roles was coined to refer to women cross-dressing as men. Typically, back in the day, men would wear a style of pants called breeches. It then referred to any man's character sung and or acted by a woman. In opera tradition and theater tradition, as I mentioned, that they were generally playing younger or adolescent males. There's also the term travesti, which is used in the Italian tradition for roles that are performed by a performer of the opposite sex, but very many travesti roles were for women to play men. It also referred to men as well. And remember that with the Restoration period with Charles II and women appearing on the stage again, this was for both women playing themselves, but also for women playing drag roles equally to men. So certain aspects of the drag tradition still remained in theater after that Restoration period. The practice of en travesti of women in operas, because initially they were getting castrato boys and men to sing higher register parts, but that was falling out of fashion because obviously their society was becoming a little bit opposed to dudes having their fucking junk messed with in order to sing higher. And there's actually a bit of a contested thing as to whether that's even always effective in maintaining a higher register voice. So they would have roles specifically written for a female singer, but they would have them performing in drag. There are also a lot of female ballet dancers, as I mentioned, playing male roles. And what's kind of sucks is that the whole drag king culture is not as popular, I find, as the drag queen culture. Now, this may speak to, again, a history of, men's expressions being valued over women's because of the laws regarding it, but also I think just because of society valuing it if it's performed by a man no matter what. That definitely affected the popularity of drag kings, but it's kind of becoming more of a thing again now. There's a couple other people I want to mention that, messed with gender roles and became very famous for it in North American pop culture and entertainment. We see this a lot in film with people like Marlene Dietrich. She often performed dressed as a man. The movie Blue Angel is a great example of this. David Bowie is often cited as one of the first drag, or if anything, androgynous, gender androgyny that we've seen in music. The New York Dolls is another great example. A lot of hair metal bands from the 80s and rock bands from the 80s would employ longer hair, heavy eye makeup, things like that, sometimes nail polish to achieve a more androgynous look. Boy George, Pete Burns, Philip Oakey would kind of be in an androgynous sort of drag. Annie Lennox is another very from the Eurythmics, and also then going forward into her solo career. Great examples of people kind of playing with the idea of gender as sort of a combination of both genders, as well as sort of the absence of gender at the same time. Some people like Kurt Cobain, men performers of the grunge era, would sometimes wear dresses while performing or in photo shoots. There was a short time where kind of trash talk shows of the 90s would poke fun at drag queens and transgender community with Jerry Springer and Maury and stuff like that. There's been a very big back and forth within entertainment of drag being used as comic relief to the point where it's both exploiting and insulting drag performers and people who are embodying a different gender or who are transgender. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, was actually a good example of that. There are a lot of movies that did not age well in terms of representation of drag. That's one of them. Comes into criticism a lot in more recent years for portraying trans people as both a joke and also somebody not to be trusted, potentially criminal. That's something that people have tried to steer away from in recent years, not using drag and trans people and gender non-conforming people as a joke. This leads very perfectly into what I wanted to talk about in terms of drag in the Black community. There's also some drag and blackface and minstrel shows. That was a thing. Some people even call drag a form of blackface, a form of gender version of blackface, making fun of gender stereotypes. Obviously, it's not exactly the same thing. I think when people are doing drag, it's more an expression of who they are. It's not like they're going out of their way to be insulting or mocking just to get a laugh. At least nowadays. There's the whole black man in a dress conspiracy that I want to address here. There's a notion amongst certain performers and some white performers, some people who aren't black, who are actors, have called this out as well, which sort of speaks to the whole using drag as a punchline, using being trans as a punchline. A lot of people consider Black men who, for all intents and purposes, are heterosexual, that there's a rite of passage for Black actors in Hollywood to achieve success through dressing in drag, most notably wearing a dress. So Tyler Perry, Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy, Jamie Foxx, these are all actors who have been brought up when this conspiracy has been cited. Their portrayals are, again, often can be seen as discriminatory, both towards women as a whole, but also towards specifically Black women, and a lot of the quote-unquote like ghetto and uneducated and loud and obnoxious stereotypes that a lot of people tend to associate with Black women, including Black men, who really shouldn't be perpetuating those stereotypes. But again, if it's going to get a laugh and it's going to make them artistically successful, then they might just go ahead and do it. There's been both controversy and conversations about this whole thing. Cat Williams recently did a very incendiary interview on a podcast with Shannon Sharpe recently called Club Shay Shay. He reinforced this conspiracy that people are trying to, there's an agenda in Hollywood to try and put Black men in dresses to emasculate them and push some agenda. If anything, the conspiracy, again, is just like, we're going to go with a trope that's worked for us for time immemorial to make us money and get people to see our movies. So it may just be that, but a lot of people have taken it to a place of they're trying to make everyone gay. And it's a humiliation ritual, essentially, for Black men in Hollywood. Dave Chappelle has also been very vocal about not playing those roles, as well as Cat Williams, among other decisions that they've had to come up against within their own creative journey. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. Kevin Hart's another person that's mentioned. The Wayans brothers, so in White Chicks, the Wayans brothers not only played women, but they played white women. So that became a whole discussion of like, so is that the same as a white person doing blackface? Is that offensive in any way? And if so, like, what are the implications of that? I think White Chicks is fucking hilarious, if we're being honest here. But I can see why you would think it was on the same level of somebody doing blackface. I don't equate the two. It's a completely different reason why white people are usually doing blackface versus the vice versa situation. So, but yeah, that's another conversation for another day as well. There's also a lot of historical theater, social events, ballroom culture where the Black community has pioneered drag. So before, colonialism and Christianity kind of taking away gender expression and making things more binary and also very patriarchy based, that fell out of favor, and it took away both the modern expression of Black people doing drag, but also the previous identities and gender recognition of different cultures who would recognize people who were trans or performed in drag or who were gender nonconforming as like a third gender or like a separate sort of option. And they had their own place and their own roles within the society. But that was kind of squashed by a lot of colonialism and missionary work. That could be that the reason that a lot of Black men feel threatened by this role in Hollywood is because all they've been taught their whole life is to be hyper masculine and emulate what the white society has told them that they need to be. And I think that there's a lot of homophobia still within the Black community, and I think that the fear of performing in drag speaks to that a lot. So I don't know. I feel like, sure, it could be considered a conspiracy, and I think there are very valid reasons why people would think it is, but there's been a lot of roles with other actors in drag as well, and I feel like it was kind of this achieving the same thing. It's just, there's a whole different way of internalizing it when you're Black, which I totally get, because it's like you're getting shit on everywhere else in your life, just specifically for your race. And now you're going to get shit on because people are going to call you out for being fruity and stuff. But it's like, if you're strong in your gender and you're confident in yourself as a man and in your masculine portrayal, then why be threatened to go there and attempt drag to have that expression? But I can see how a lot of actors would feel uneasy when it's like, okay, it's like we know that role is going to get offered to us, that people are going to want us to put a dress on and act like a woman because that's going to get the most laughs, because people still have this idea that it's just a running joke. And a lot of people don't want to be the butt of a joke. That's why I feel like that this idea of the conspiracy of the Black man in a dress continues on, which is unfortunate. I do feel like people are being pigeonholed into these roles a little bit, but because there's like so much more nuance and opportunity that could be given to a Black actor, rather than just be like, we're going to put you in a dress so everyone can laugh at you, and reinforce the idea that drag is not about gender fluidity or expression or creativity or like living your truth. It's just a dude in a dress that everyone's going to point and laugh at. Right? So yeah, that's a very complicated conversation. I wanted to bring it up because in terms of inclusion and in terms of, I think, some lingering issues within the Black community about homophobia and transphobia, like, as we all know, Black trans women experience the most violence and discrimination of any group within the LGBTQ community. So that's something that was not lost on me when I was looking up this information. And I really think that that's something that people need to remember is, I think we need to be embracing Black drag. A lot of the origin of North American drag and why it's so popular came from the Black community. So I think that there needs to be more acceptance of it in the culture, but maybe there can be a balance of how those roles are presented and how they're written for both the actor and the audience. But yeah, like with a lot of other roles, continue. So that's my 2 cents on that conspiracy. I just wanted to point that out. Which I guess brings us to RuPaul, one of the most famous Black drag queens, if not the most famous drag queen ever. Let's just go into RuPaul's history a little bit. As I mentioned before, RuPaul has come up against a lot of scrutiny in the last few years for some behind-the-scenes criticisms and stuff about RuPaul's Drag Race and the money-making machine it's turned into versus a genuine portrayal of a reality competition for drag performers. The reality show is a reality show. There's writing, there's things that people will say and do to incite drama, there's editing, there's favoritism, there's talk of people not getting paid properly, and then there's the whole RuPaul fracking situation. We're just going to go into the brief history of RuPaul quickly, just so people kind of know where that all started. So RuPaul Charles, who usually just goes by the name RuPaul when performing in drag, they started out born and raised in San Diego and then moved to Atlanta to go to school. And RuPaul developed a lot of his drag persona and counterculture shock performance aspect of their drag in Atlanta through the punk scene. RuPaul ended up sort of migrating to New York. He became a popular fixture on the gay nightclub scene. He started performing more in drag as RuPaul in music videos, TV shows. As RuPaul in drag, she released a debut single called Supermodel, in brackets, You Better Work, from the album Supermodel of the World. Since then, RuPaul's had quite a few other songs come out, which really, as far as I know, are kind of, you know, if you know sort of thing. You hear a lot of RuPaul's original music on Drag Race that they'll get the contestants to perform and stuff like that. RuPaul went on to become a spokesperson for MAC Cosmetics when they were starting up the MAC AIDS campaign to raise money for AIDS research and treatment. RuPaul actually had her own show, The RuPaul Show, and a radio show that they were hosting with Michelle Visage. RuPaul started RuPaul's Drag Race in 2009. So that was the year I graduated from university. Very low budget at the time. There's definitely been a glow up in the show's production value since it exploded in popularity. There's now a whole bunch of different, I want to say there's like 16 seasons of the American version of Drag Race. There's a bunch of different spin-offs within different countries now. Canada has their own version as well. They also did RuPaul's Drag U, Drag Race All-Stars, Secret Celebrity Drag Race. RuPaul has also been a host and judge on other reality shows. I mentioned Brady Bunch movie, Larry Brady sequel, and To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which RuPaul appears as a character called Rachel Tension, a play on the term racial tension. And there's a scene in the movie where they appear wearing a Confederate flag, like a bodycon Confederate flag dress. To give you an idea of the irreverence, they've also been in the movie But I'm a Cheerleader, where RuPaul plays himself as a man as the counselor at a gay conversion camp, essentially. It stars Natasha Lyonne. She gets sent to this camp because of lesbian tendencies. It's like to turn gay kids straight, essentially. But one of the counselors is extremely gay. RuPaul's also been on Broad City, Grace and Frankie, among other appearances in movies and TV shows. Very early on in his career, RuPaul was featured in the B-52's video for Love Shack. As a recording artist, using the drag persona of RuPaul, she has released 15 studio albums. Yeah, so that's a pretty crazy resume. Most recently, RuPaul has won several awards for his work in the LGBTQ community. They've won GLAAD Media Awards. I think that Paul's won Emmys for RuPaul's Drag Race like a few years running now. Now, on to the criticisms of RuPaul. So, RuPaul has come under fire for comments that he made about the transgender community. After a few seasons in, we start to acknowledge that some of the contestants are not just gay men performing as women, that a lot of them are actually going through a transition to live as women, including Sonique Love, Carmen Carrera, Gia Gunn, Monica Beverly Hills, Sasha Colby, Peppermint. Because the show, and again, I'm going to use some terms that are not exactly appropriate anymore. The show used to use terms like tranny and she-male. The opening of the show would have a message for all the girls performing. So in the beginning, one of the taglines of the show was drag race, referring to like race car competition, the reality show between the drag queens, the race between them. And when they would all be in the workroom together in the first beginning of the episodes, RuPaul would send them messages in the form of she-male. Yeah. So it would be like, "Oh, girl, you got she-male." And then they'd all run over to the TV and get the message for RuPaul. The tagline of it used to be, "May the best woman win," which they then changed to "May the best drag queen win," because they didn't want to only imply that it was men dressing as women and that was the only expression. They wanted to just say drag queen, because drag queen can now include cis gay men dressing as, for all intents and purposes, cis het women, but could also include gender fluid, non-binary individuals, trans men, straight men, lesbian women. There's other contestants now, two-spirited people in the indigenous community. So there's a lot of other things that get passed over in just calling it a drag race for women and saying may the best woman win. And then with certain terms like tranny and she-male, it's like the F word for gay people, right? You know, if you bring it up, and obviously it's not going to be the same as the N word for black people, but it's kind of a thing where it's like I'm not going to do that, guys. And even queer used to be an offensive term that was reclaimed by the LGBTQ community. But before, like, calling someone a queer, like, that was a major insult. So that's kind of been reimagined as a term that some people like to use, but it's also something that a lot of people have negative connotations with for good reason and don't like using that word. Same with the F slur. Some people call each other that, and as gay people in the gay community, you're more than welcome to reclaim that word and use it, but there's also a huge section of the gay community that's like, nobody should be using that word. In this sense, when we're using terms like quote-unquote tranny and she-male in such a prominent setting, what's going to happen is that people that are not within the transgender or the LGBTQ community are going to start thinking it's okay to say those things when it's not. And of course, it's then having those terms is implying that it's like okay to throw around offensive things when it comes to drag queens and trans people. That "you've got she-male" phrase got replaced over time. At first, RuPaul dug in and said that people attempting to police his language didn't know that RuPaul's allowed to use that term, and that tranny is referring to transgender, transvestite, and drag queens, not just trans women. At one point, RuPaul even said that a post-transition trans woman would probably not be accepted onto the show. So calling out the fact that a lot of people who claim to be trans were still like in a pre-op state, and therefore it was still drag or cross-dressing or female impersonation. RuPaul also compared post-op trans drag queens to an athlete taking performance-enhancing drugs, implying that there would be an unfair advantage within the competition. Since RuPaul made those statements, a lot of transgender contestants have appeared on the show. RuPaul did express some regret for these remarks and owned up to the fact that it was a shitty thing to say, finally. The final quote from RuPaul being that the only screening criteria for contestants now is that they have charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent, which we all know what that spells out. You don't have to have a real cunt to serve cunt, but if you do, that's fine too. Again, there's also other criticisms of RuPaul, like exploiting the queens, putting them into contracts where they basically have to like work for RuPaul and World of Wonder in perpetuity. They can't turn down gigs if they're called to gigs. Now that RuPaul's Drag Race is on MTV, the format has once again been shortened very considerably, and there's a lot more editing to push it into a smaller time format. I suppose it was their way of trying to appeal to a younger demographic or just a different demographic. VH1 tended to be for like more of an older crowd and logo and stuff like that. So maybe that was why they made the switch to MTV. Maybe they were offering them more money to RuPaul and the queens make less money. I don't know. But I mean, you can't deny, and even people who have been critical of RuPaul in the past negatively have said that drag queens who have been negatively critical of RuPaul have also admitted that they wouldn't really have the careers that they have today without being on the show and having that opportunity. So there's a big community of people who really do owe a lot to RuPaul for being one of the first and doing it, one of the first people that did it the best and paved the way for so many other people. So we can't have this discussion of North American drag and global drag without talking about RuPaul, one of the most famous to do it. I want to address both the positive and the negatives in the interest of fairness. I do want to go through some of the most famous drag queens of all time besides RuPaul, and some drag kings as well. So some of the more famous from RuPaul's Drag Race, we'll just start there. So some of the more famous drag queens from the show include Trixie Mattel and Katya, Alyssa Edwards, Courtney Act, Courtney Act, Alaska Thunderfuck for obvious reasons, shortened it to Alaska. Bob the Drag Queen, which is one of my favorite drag queen names of all time. Jinx Monsoon, who is another drag queen that has gotten a lot of really good roles lately outside of the show, most notably Little Shop of Horrors and Doctor Who. Brooklyn Heights is the Canadian delegate for Drag Race, classically trained ballet dancer, because she was a winner on the American version when they did the spin-off Canada's Drag Race. They gave Brooklyn the hosting title. So there are certain iterations of Drag Race that RuPaul does not host directly. Any of the North American... What are you trying to do? Which one do you like the best? I think you were pointing to Monet Exchange. You like Monet Exchange, buddy? Phobos, what's your drag name? Pussy Gahor? That's what I'm going to call you. Pussy Gahor! That's your name. Eh? Oh, butt in the air. Look at that. So cute, my boy. So yeah, Brooklyn Heights went on to host Canada's Drag Race. Definitely an iconic queen. I mentioned Monet Exchange. So Monet Exchange and Bob the Drag Queen, as well as Trixie and Katya, have partnered up to do hosting on different YouTube shows that they do now. Violet Chachki. So Violet Chachki and Gottmik also host a podcast sort of YouTube show as well together. So a lot of drag queens ended up becoming really good Judies after Drag Race and collabed on different things together, which is really nice to see. There's a lot of drag queens who have nothing to do with the RuPaul franchise anymore at all after some pretty fiery ends to that. Willem, Tyra Sanchez come to mind. Pearl comes to mind. There was also Brooklyn Heights ended up dating pretty openly on the show Vanessa Vanjie Mateo. So there's also been some Kikis and Kaikais that have gone on within the show, some romances that blossomed. Trinity Taylor, who also goes by Trinity the Tuck now. It was two drag queens who had a lot of plastic surgery done. I think it was Detox. Detox was the other one. So they were on the show Botched, the plastic surgery show Botched, where people will come in with their shitty plastic surgery that they got done that's not looking great, and the two plastic surgeons try to consult with them to try and fix the botch. So those are some RuPaul's Drag Race queens that have become very popular in recent years. Some other famous drag queens that came about before Drag Race who kind of helped pave the way. Lady Bunny. So Lady Bunny, again, referenced a lot, both in reverence and in jest, among a lot of drag queens. Lady Bunny is known for her very large wigs and her very offensive off-color stand-up humor within her drag act. Lady Bunny is also the founder of an event called Wigstock, which I did mention a little bit in the music festivals episode that I just did, which is still not out on video on Patreon. It is available in listening format. I'm hoping that I'm going to try and upload both episodes together with that one and this one, so maybe it'll all end up working out that you'll get a double feature this time around. So Lady Bunny, as I mentioned, started Wigstock in the East Village. It was not running for about just over a decade, but with the help of Neil Patrick Harris, he and Lady Bunny helped to revive it, and it's now kind of experiencing this sort of renaissance. It started out as just a few thousand people, and then it kind of grew and grew until it became, a proper festival in its own right, specifically catering to the LGBTQIA+ and drag performance community. There's a documentary called Wigstock, and there's also a movie called Wig that talk about Wigstock. There's also a festival called Bushwig that takes place in Bushwick area of Brooklyn that kind of plays on that idea as well. Other famous drag queens. Divine, a lot of you may know Divine. Possibly giving RuPaul a run for her money in terms of prominent North American drag queens. Divine is again another one who combined a drag persona with like offensive, subversive shock value in terms of their performance. So Divine was sort of a muse of John Waters. John Waters is known for producing some pretty out there movies that spin in the face of the conventional, straight-laced American society. Divine was born Harris Glenn Milstead. Like with a lot of reference to John Waters' work, Divine is from Baltimore, Maryland. By the mid-1960s, they were involved in the counterculture scene where they met John Waters. John Waters was the person who named them Divine. They started out doing work in an acting troupe, and then Divine became a principal character in a whole bunch of John Waters movies. Mondo Trasho, Multiple Maniacs, Pink Flamingos, Female Trouble, Polyester, and Hairspray. Hairspray was where they finally broke into the mainstream. Hairspray became a very popular movie, not just among the gay community, but just among American film connoisseurs and live theater performance people. Divine sort of developed a cult following. Pink Flamingos is very well known for Divine being kind of not the greatest person. The tagline for the movie is an exercise in poor taste. The movie features exhibition, voyeurism, sodomy, masturbation, references to murder, animal cruelty, cannibalism, foot fetishes. The film sort of culminates in a very famous scene where Divine consumes dog feces. It was banned in several countries. A lot of places would not show the film. Divine in the movie lives as the name Babs Johnson. And there's like a very famous scene where it's like, what are your values, Divine? To which they respond like, kill everyone now, condone first degree murder, eat shit, filth are my politics, filth is my life. Yeah, so that's a very iconic quote from that movie. So-called filth, and especially performed by somebody who was not accepted at that time in society, only added to the shocking and, I guess, like visceral nature of the movie. So Divine is one of the greatest to do it. A lot of people say that the character Ursula from The Little Mermaid was based on the character of Divine. A lot of like the body type of Ursula as well as the makeup is very reminiscent of Divine. So quite the legacy that Divine has left. They passed away in the 80s. It's been quite a few years since Divine has left us, but has left so much behind to tie the drag community to subversion and fucking with the status quo and making the so-called normies uncomfortable. And a lot of people's conception of, you know, art that actually affects society in a meaningful and provocative way, like you have to take it over the line and push the envelope, is the idea. The queer community and drag queens need to be at the forefront of being subversive and continuing to show the satirical nature of how our society works. Because, like, people are so shocked by the filthy nature of Pink Flamingos, but, like, we allow and condone so much fucked up shit in the world to go on, and yet we're calling out this movie, which is itself calling out so-called morality and traditional wholesome values that, when you really think about it, a lot of us don't really have, because we allow so much heinous shit to take place in the world and don't care and are apathetic about it. Yet we care about this movie, which isn't even real, because it offends our sensibilities. Just like being gay, just like being queer throughout history has offended the sensibilities of the mainstream culture. So going back to famous drag queens, Flawless Sabrina. I'll go a little bit into Flawless Sabrina. I did mention her earlier. So Mother Flawless Sabrina was a pioneer for the transgender community and drag queens. Venus Extravaganza. That was the last person I'm going to mention in this. I really want to touch on Venus Extravaganza. I want to touch on her. Early life of Flawless Sabrina and their career. Drag queens were very stigmatized, not only by mainstream society, but in the gay community. A lot of gay people didn't like the idea of drag and female impersonation. Sabrina was known for organizing all of these drag queen pageants. There is now like kind of a separation of drag where it's like the ballroom scene and a pageant scene that does still exist. A lot of pageant-based drag takes place in the South, as far as I understand, whereas like the ballroom scene is kind of more of an East Coast thing that sort of moved to the West Coast. But pageantry still does very much exist in drag. There's still a lot of like, the continental titles and things like that. I was just watching something today about a drag queen called Flame Monroe, who is also a very famous drag queen. They talk a little bit about their experience and how important it is to, acknowledge that drag queens and drag performers are still part of the gay community, and trans people are so important to the art form and the movement. Sabrina was actually arrested 3 times promoting this documentary, The Queen, that I mentioned earlier. Sabrina is an MC, basically like the host and MC of the pageant, as well as the organizer. The success really catapulted both Sabrina's career, but also made drag more accessible to people. In fact, there was actually a poster of Sabrina in The Queen, which they include in the Pink Flamingos as like a brief moment. They've had a handful of appearances in film, TV, theater productions, things like that. There was actually a PBS a short documentary about Flawless Sabrina, narrated by Peppermint from RuPaul's Drag Race, who we mentioned earlier as well. I think that was everybody I wanted to mention. The last person I'll talk about is Venus Extravaganza from Paris is Burning. Honorable mentions for some drag kings as well. Vico Ortiz. I really want to mention Vico Ortiz. Vico Ortiz is so fucking amazing. So sexy. This is a kind of a meta example of drag being cited in a historical context for survival and social mobility reasons, but also the actor that plays this character is in real life portraying drag. So Vico Ortiz is non-binary and uses they, them pronouns. They identify as gender fluid and non-binary, but they take on the title of drag king, I guess, assumably because they were born and raised as a woman. Vico Suave is their drag name, and they, in addition to performing as a drag king, they're very famously portrayed a woman posing as a man on a pirate ship in the TV show Our Flag Means Death as the character Jim. They develop a romantic relationship with one of the other crew members. In fact, because of fans doing fan art of the character on the show getting top surgery, that was actually like an inspiration for them to actually get it in real life, they said. If you haven't seen Our Flag Means Death, it's a fucking amazing show. I love it so much. In the show, Jim will wear like a big floppy hat. They have a prosthetic nose and like a beard they wear and like kind of nondescript male clothing. And they kind of like just keep to themselves and never talk. So they assume that Jim's some kind of mute, but only like one person on the ship knows their secret, that they're actually a woman posing as a man. This is partly for, again, the reasons I mentioned of, social mobility and safety, but they're also on the run from like a bunch of people, and that's the reason why they're in disguise and hiding on a pirate ship. So there's a lot of different reasons why they decided to portray that character in drag. But yeah, check that show out if you haven't already. It's really funny. It's great. Lots of good gay shit going on in that show, which you will like. Vico Ortiz is also an activist for Latin American causes, anti-racism, gender neutrality in the Spanish language, among other causes. So Vico Ortiz, we stand, we love. There's also Land Insider. There's a competition show that's also quite popular, not as popular as RuPaul's Drag Race, but it's a show called Dragula, and it's hosted by a sibling team called the Boulet Brothers, but I don't know if they're actually brothers. But they like basically dress in almost identical sort of twin drag. And it's a very like spooky horror goth based drag. So the premise of the show is that they're getting all like the scary goth horror queens to compete together. And all the competitions have to incorporate something to do with that aesthetic of like the Halloween creepy sort of vibe. And Land Insider is a drag king who was on season 3 of Dragula and ended up winning. Land Insider identifies as a lesbian and has a wife, but will perform in a more masculine drag persona. Stormé de Lavery, Sexy Galaxy, and also male impersonator Vesta Tilly as inspirations for their drag aesthetic. So Stormé de Lavery is also referenced along with Marsha P. Johnson as one of the people who was involved in the Stonewall riots, was a gay civil rights icon and performer. Marsha P. Johnson and Stormé de Lavery are sort of known as like the Rosa Parks of the gay rights movement, the LGBTQ rights movement. Generally known as like a very butch male impersonator. So I don't know if any of you guys heard about this whole like call out Jasmine Crockett, I believe her name is, against Marjorie Taylor Greene, like making some comment about her having fake eyelashes on, and then Jasmine Crockett responded by saying that Marjorie Taylor had a... Which I was thinking later that it's like, I feel like that's just insulting to the butches. Bleach blonde, bad built butch body. That's what it was. Bleach blonde, bad built butch body. Which is like, okay, why do we need to come for the butches? Like, they did nothing here. Like, why are we... Like, that's an insult to the butch community, if in my opinion. In Defense of Butch Bodies was an article that I just read recently. I just feel like everything else was accurate, but like, come on, don't come for the butches. Come on now. Anyway, but that was hilarious. Like, yeah. Like, if you read the dolls, prepare to get read back. Like, and like, why are either of us making these comments in Congress? But if anything, like, I think that Jasmine was well within her rights to say that. Like, if no one was really going to call Marjorie Taylor Greene out for what she said and make her leave the room or really have her apologize, then that's kind of fair game for you to get read. The Library of Congress was open that day, and that bitch got a full reading. She got dragged for filth. Like, honestly. So, now we're going to go to Venus Extravaganza, and we're going to talk briefly about the current state of drag a little bit. Venus Extravaganza. They were prominently featured in the doc Paris is Burning. They state that they began cross-dressing and performing in drag at around age 13 or 14. And this documentary was released in 1990, I believe, and using footage from like the late 80s, early 90s. She was part of the House of Extravaganza. She basically moved away from home to not cause her family any shame, and moved into this house and started performing at the balls, realizing that they weren't just a drag queen, but they were a transgender woman, and talked a lot about like what a lot of the drag queens at the time aspired to be, is like a wealthy white woman. And they talked about how they wanted like a sex change operation and things like that. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, the trans community experiences a lot of discrimination and violence, even from members of the gay community, but a lot from cis het men who, well, claim that they're cis het, but want to have sexual experiences with trans people, may or may not realize that they are having a sexual experience with a trans person, or they know and are seeking it out specifically to incite violence against them. So something happened to Venus Extravaganza in 1988, and they were found strangled to death under a bed. The doc was still wrapping up filming, and so Angie Extravaganza, who was the leader of the house, was told about her death and had to break the news to Venus's biological parents. And in a kind of a weird sort of premonition, I mean, this is something that probably happens to a lot of trans people, but unfortunately, but Venus Extravaganza kind of describes a time that she was almost attacked and got out and escaped. It brings us to the current state of drag and the fate of some of the performers and people within the community. Society is going backwards in a lot of ways in terms of rights and freedoms for the LGBTQ community because of conservative religious influence. So we have a lot of laws that are coming into place in the States, a lot of backlash in other countries, just as, you know, these laws have been put in place to support same-sex marriage and have freedoms for drag performers and transgender community and things like that, as well as other people within the queer community. And now conservative people want to take all of that away. They're managing to do it a lot of the time through legislation that a lot of drag activists are fighting against. So there's even more work to be done now more than ever to prove to the world that drag queens are not villains. They're not scary. They're not going to sexually abuse your children. Like all the things we hear about kids getting touched and molested and raped, it's like coaches, priests, teachers, Congress, people in government, positions of authority, not drag queens. Drag queens are not doing this shit. When like a drag queen is doing like a drag time story hour, there's a very different persona and manner of speaking versus when it's like somebody performing at a drag brunch or like an adults only drag club. And a lot of people are equating the two situations. It's like, oh, drag queen's going to come in and like do a bunch of offensive humor around our kids and stuff like that. But they're literally just coming in there and reading a book to a kid in drag, which really is not anybody doing anything wrong. It's just people don't like it. They think it's icky. That's really just it. It's like people need to get over like their ick factor of having to like be associating with and tolerating queer people and drag performers, when it's like it's really just a lack of understanding and an inability to mind your own fucking business is what it comes down to at the end of the day. So this has now led to, you know, like a rise in a lot of safety concerns for the LGBTQ community and for drag performers. It's affecting not only people's livelihood, but it's affecting their lives, their safety. Yeah, it's really scary to see this kind of resurgence in like super conservative values, quote unquote values, taking over society again, and people being so against any kind of knowledge of anything that isn't heteronormative and that fits into this, like, like we said, the binary of you need to act like this if you were born like this, and there's no other options for you. Not up for discussion. But there's a really good show that just came out, a mini series called We Are Here, featuring queens from RuPaul's Drag Race who have become very famous over the years, and they go through America to sort of approach this issue that's going on now and bring drag to different communities and try and explain to people that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's entertainment, and it's a personal expression of identity and creativity. And it's a way for the queer community to bond with each other and bring back to society the idea that it's okay to play with gender roles. It's okay to have that expression. It's okay to want to show your love for the male and female form just in like a different way, and really turn the whole idea of having to conform to one gender based on what society tells you for like no reason, just some arbitrary reason because some people read a book that was written like however long, many years ago, in, well, several religions are, not just Christianity, I shouldn't say that, a lot of different religions are rooted in homophobia, and as we've come to realize, a lot of that comes from both misogynistic translations of biblical and religious texts, but it also comes from the culture outside of the religion discriminating against queer people. It's not even something that's really even mentioned. It's like people are disseminating false information to control people. Being gay and stuff doesn't really help religious communities who are trying to convince people to have as many kids as possible and uphold the sanctity of marriage and stuff like that. So let's just let people be happy and free and live their lives and bring joy to others. And I know that I will continue to support drag as an art form and as a form of personal expression. I don't want to have to live in a world where people feel like they has to fit into this little box that somebody else has decided for you. And like, drag isn't always sexual. It isn't always, quote unquote, offensive shock humor. That people realize that there's a time and a place for that with, consenting adults. Phobis. There's also the reality that why would you want to condone, or even like sometimes even apathy is even worse than like full out condoning something negative sometimes, because it's like, I don't even like care enough to have an opinion. Sometimes you need to have a fucking opinion on things. Like, even if you had a shitty take on something, I feel like sometimes that's better than just like ignoring the issue and acting like it doesn't exist. Because it's only a matter of time before that issue comes to your door. When they, like, it's that whole saying, when they run out of other people to hate, they're going to come after the group that thinks they're on top next. We all have to protect each other. And in terms of drag, I feel like it's an art form and it's a journey that people go on in order to really live authentically and be who they truly are. I only see those situations existing in places of love and of wanting to make others happy and make them laugh and show them that life doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, as somebody who's mixed, as somebody who likes playing with gender, as somebody who considers himself a member of the queer community, somebody who's gone through a lifetime of trying to figure out what I am sexually, being attracted to both men and women and people who are trans and non-binary, and trying to figure out like what that all means for me. drag has been very instrumental in that process at very pivotal moments in my life. And knowing so many people within the theater community and in the LGBTQ plus community who really showed me like what drag, the potential that drag has. I think that's a good place to end the episode off. I'm going to now go and eat all of my gay bacon strips and ladyfingers, chocolate ladyfingers, and decide on what my final name is going to be for my drag king persona. So, with all that being said, are you going to come say goodbye, buddy? And then I'll give you some dinner, okay? Yeah, it's late. I'm going to give you some dinner. Come here, buddy. Thank you so much for sitting with me and listening to me ramble about gay shit for 3 hours. I really appreciate you. And I hope you all have a wonderful Pride Month. Hi, gay! Happy Pride Month! Phobos is looking at me very judgmentally, wondering where his food is. So I'm going to go now. Yes, go out in the world. Enjoy the girls, the gays, the days, and the slays. Enjoy your holidays, enjoy your Pride Months, and your Pride Parades, and your Pride events, and get out there and dress and drag and do the hula. Timon and Pumbaa, underrated drag performers of all time. Sorry, I forgot to check them, so good thing I got them in there at the last minute. I will be going off to dress and drag and do the hula now with my boy, my sweet baby. Look, him to say goodbye. And also tell me to wrap shit up so I can go feed him. So goodbye, everybody, and be gay and do crimes, and I will see you all later. Thank you all for attending, and until next time, I hopefully will put another episode out before, 2 months. We'll see you next time on Fantasy Tavern. Okay, bye!